Adam's about to open a bottle of wine.
What are you going to open?
Gin.
I'm looking for a Brunello. If not, we've got a Chianti Classico Reserva.
Ah, excellent. Interesting method of clinking across a screen, as it were, that I'm sure will continue a robust presence of online events. It'd be nice to seeing everyone. Most importantly, so I can see where you all live.
I can switch the camera on. Can I do that?
Well, let's give it a go.
I might have to put some clothes on first. Only kidding.
Okay. Well, I mean, 10 is a belting vintage, so you know, I think.
Haven't got any Monster Munch to go with it, though.
No, and that is the perfect pairing. But it's a question of, do you go for the beef or the, what is it? Was it smoky bacon? So, Filippo, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I mean, God, it must be really tough out in Italy at the moment. With, let's be honest, only relatively recent acquaintance in the last couple of years, and yet your wines have come to be an important part of our portfolio. We were very sorry you couldn't join us for our Tuscan tasting a couple of weeks ago. Completely understand why, but the wines were an unqualified success, I have to say. 2015 is an amazing vintage. Before we go on to that specifically, maybe for those who are less familiar with you and Castello di Romitorio, you could just sort of unpack a little bit about the estate's history, your family history, and the region, what it means to you.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Tom, for inviting me. Yeah, definitely a bit of a hard time out here, but it's also a lovely springtime. So, you know, it's quite beautiful, and the air is incredibly clean, and there's dolphins in Venice floating around, and things have really cleaned up in an amazing way. And it's like seeing the Italy of my childhood. My name is Filippo Chia, and my father's name, which is probably the most important name for Castello Romitorio, is Sandro Chia. And Dad came back to Montalcino at the time there was 25 wineries. Okay, so there's 400 today right now, and also we're in the northwest, so 450 meters above sea level, above Val di Cava, in the northern part of Montalcino, which has come to become also the coolest part of Montalcino. So you get some of the most structured Brunellos from the north, and more of the lighter, more dancey Brunellos from the south, and that's independent of alcohol. Southern Brunellos tend to be higher in alcohol. So what you're getting from the north is slightly less hot wines with a little more color.
So, I mean, how would you, as we're kind of moving on to that, how would you characterize the style of your wines generally?
Well, I follow more of a Soldera style. So the tannic, Sangiovese, when it's perfectly ripe and the seed is perfectly ripe and the stem is right, it is almost a sweet figgy grape, but maintaining its acidity. Okay, so I've always, in a way, followed the school of the supple, approachable fruit and not too much tannin.
You know, one of the things we've always found very refreshing about Brunello specifically, and I guess Barolo in the north, is that unlike Burgundy, en primeur, and specifically Bordeaux, although we'll see what happens this year, at least you guys release your wines with a considerable amount of bottle age. So, you know, when they hit the market, when the first time they hit the market and you can buy them, you know, we're talking what, 4 or 5 years, you know, for a reserve level.
4 years and 7 months.
Yeah, you know, so I think you've got a much more complete product where people can make their own minds up, and whether you want to drink on the fruit or let the wine sit in the cellar, develop more complexity, you know, more secondary notes.
Acidity to Provence, which is basically where the Roman Empire, when they escaped from Rome, they went to England and to south of France. You know, so if you want to find a real Roman or ancient Roman, you go to those places.
Yeah,
that's where the
south of France, obviously, and the ones who preferred the bad food and the bad weather ended up in the UK. But okay.
Well, it's not necessarily that there was bad weather 2,000 years ago. There's been all sorts of ups and downs. Remember, the Romans conquered the Germans in skirts. So, and there was lions in Sicily and all sorts of kind of
and there were
African
vines. There were vines in Cumbria during the Roman rule as well. So, you know, again, I guess the Gulf Stream has a lot to answer for.
Yes, to this pressure, right? So what's unique about Montalcino is this shale-like earth called Elastro, which some of you might remember. It was the name of a cheap wine in the 80s with a purple cap, which was like a export wine. But that said, this Elastro is the key to Montalcino. It's all these thin slabs of basically ancient brackish muds and sands that have been compressed between basically the volcanic granite and the plates of pushing towards us from Africa, and that have this special earth. So that's where you're getting the most elegant Sangioveses. And that's why they're kind of salty and almost like you bit your lip. They have this sanguine quality to them. Everyone's fine.
So unfortunately, I don't have a Castello di Romitorio wine this evening because I'm stuck up here at home, but we're drinking a bottle of Mastroianni 2010. So I've got two questions.
Nice.
For you. I've got two questions for you. One of them is about the 2010 vintage, that amazing vintage. And the other one is, am I drinking baby's blood? Should I really be cellaring this for much longer?
Well, that's a good question, Nathan. 2010 was a great vintage, similar in a way to 15, what we're going to talk about later, in the sense that when there's a perfect convergence of certain events, which basically start in the winter with the snowfall. So when you get that snowfall and it leaches deep into the earth, you get basically a late flowering. So the later you can delay that flowering, and the longer you're going to push into no man's land, right into October, the more elegant generally you're going to have the vintage, and the more perfect that vintage is going to be. So 2010 and 15 were both vintages where Mother Nature basically tuned the machine perfectly. Mastroianni, for instance, which is a historical winery, slightly older than ours, about 6 or 7 years older than ours, but part of that original group of those first 40 guys. They're in an area that's very warm in the southeast, and 2010 was basically for them, that's like a stellar wine. So potentially you may have killed a baby, but I'm trying to justify that you probably have not, and you're drinking a certain aspect of the Brunello, which it might lose and evolve into something else.
Maybe Filippo, we could kind of turn focus on to the 2015 vintage, which is obviously the live current vintage that we are releasing and enjoying selling, and it will enjoy drinking when it's shipped. Tell us a bit more about this vintage.
So it's basically 15. You'll probably get the most exotic Brunellos you've ever had of any vintage, because not only is it a great vintage, but it also has a complexity of these new young clones and the old clones that were typical of Montalcino. Basically, work in the vineyards, meeting tradition, has allowed Brunello to basically step it up to the next level, I think. I mean, the 15 is by far, technically, scientifically, as a general statement, as well as vintage and nature, is the perfect balance between tradition and, let's say, science. Our Brunello, I think, is the best Brunello we've ever made, straight hands down ever. Super approachable. You pop it and you drink it, and it's super clean, super long, super powerful. And we're lucky because we're up in the hills. It's 14.5 alcohol.
Steve was wondering that he's bought some 15 recently and was wondering when will it be at its peak?
After the first summer after release. So that would be basically exactly 5 years from the harvest. It's a reasonable time to enjoy at least the first phase of drinkability. But I also like sometimes tasting the wines like 6 or 7 a year after they've been bottled to see their state of virility, and then to take that into consideration and to see how they evolve. So always buy a case, especially in a vintage like 15, and taste one today, taste one in a year, and taste one in 5.
I was really interested in the intro you gave about the north sort of south divide and the 2 hillsides, if you like. And I couldn't help but notice actually also for you, Tom, you seem to stock Castello di Romitorio and also Val di Cava, which is on that north-facing side. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about the styles, and maybe you, Tom, as well, whether that's a specific sort of style you've honed in on, or whether that's just potluck of it being on your website.
It's always a very personal selection. I think, you know, first of all, you know, you've got to drink what's in the bottle, you know, and you've got to enjoy that, and you've got to think these are great wines, and they, you know, they fit your requirements hedonistically, sensuously. And then when we come on to actually deciding who we want to work with commercially, then obviously the wines have to be great value. We have to love the people that we're working with. Stylistically, I think, you know, we're currently working obviously with Filippo, with Romitorio, with Mastroianni as well. Interestingly, of course, Mastroianni is much further back or further south, so I think you've got a very different style there. Val di Cava, interestingly, I mean, pretty much, you know, the vineyards, you know, almost touch. I think Filippo will tell you he can kind of throw stones down onto Vincenzo Abruzzese from the top of his vineyards. And then we also work, as you know, with Argiano as well, who I think make a very accessible, extremely hedonistic, easy to enjoy style Brunello as well. So indeed, thanks everyone for joining. We'll be back again with Lionel Fori on the 1st of April and a few wines. Hopefully you guys will join us. We'll get some wines out to you as well. Thanks so much for bearing with us this evening. As I said, this was our first session. We're looking forward to doing a lot more. Your comments, your feedback, good, bad, or ugly, much appreciated. Thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of the evening and see you very, very soon, either this side of the screen or in person. Thank you so much and good night. Cheers.